Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Dave Rosenlund, and I'm one of your hosts today. And I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Thanks for joining us. Joining me today is Rina Nir. Rina is a subject matter expert in the area of quality assurance and compliance in life sciences, but I'll get more into Rina's background in just a moment. So just a few housekeeping items before we get into the meat of today's webinar. Your microphones are muted today. The participant microphones are muted, that is. That's because we find frequently there's unwanted background noise, often unintentional. But we're going to keep that noise cut down and kept to a minimum by muting your microphones. And we'll take questions and answers from the audience via the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of your webinar screen. You can queue up your questions at any point during the presentation. Just write them down and send them along. We're going to save those questions until the end of the meeting. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll read those questions to Rina, presumably. If there are any questions for ALM Works, we'll obviously answer those as well. The webinar is being recorded, so sometime next week, you should expect to see an email from us letting you know that the webinar is available. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with a colleague, we will be making that available to you shortly. The agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm going to finish introducing Rina. She's going to give a presentation and demonstration. That's where we're going to spend the vast majority of our time today. I'll say just a couple of words about ALM Works towards the end, and then we'll get to those questions and answers. So let me introduce Rina. Like you, Rina Nir has firsthand experience with today's topic. She founded RadBee, a specialty consultancy firm, to help make life for quality assurance folks like yourself who are concerned with things like regulatory compliance easier and more accessible. She's an avid proponent of using Jira for project management. And she discovered that Jira did have some shortcomings, however. She found it was difficult, for example, to see the big picture in many projects. So with a little bit of effort, she discovered that if you combined a couple of add-on tools with Jira, a couple of Jira apps to the mix, things became much easier. And she's going to share those findings with you today. She uses Jira every day in her own work and recommends Jira to all of her clients, trying to help them improve their project management in their environments. So without further ado, I'm going to let Rina walk you through her presentation and demonstration. I'll come back towards the end to help facilitate the Q&A session. Over to you.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody. So yes, when I think about my customers and colleagues, people who are delivering products or computer systems into the pharmaceutical or medical device industry, and always, as is the case today, trying to do that in an agile, rapid manner, implementing short delivery cycles, being very efficient. I think about them as brilliant people who are trying to do very excellent and rapid work, but carrying a very heavy burden. So we can just, let's say it very simply, needing to meet regulatory compliance, either if it's the FDA, GAMP5, ISO 13485, is essentially an add-on burden compared to how other people can develop their software and products. So if an agile software development team today works, for example, in Jira, like many of them do, they have to be bothered with epics, stories, and eventually to test everything. And that's the typical collection of issue types that you will see in their Jira, but also the vocabulary they use and the work that they need to manage. So they need to manage their epics and their sprints using stories. However, if you are in the life sciences sector, you have to be concerned also with the other deliverables at the end of the project, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you have met your design control objectives. And for that purpose, you definitely need to manage risks, high-level requirements, so you can call them user requirements or maybe product requirements, and functional specifications. And these are all different and other creatures than the normal, so to speak, issues in Jira. They are not epics, stories, or tests. So people are looking for ways of how to manage these extra artifacts that they need to manage, and they arrive to different solutions. I have seen, and even today, I still see people managing these elements of the project in Excel. Alternatively, people can purchase other very high-end and sophisticated tools to manage these artifacts and try somehow to integrate that with Jira. This, of course, creates an extra burden, financially, because you need to invest in an extra platform, but also in terms of the workflow that then has to happen within the team. Suddenly, people need to interact with more than one system. Maybe the transparency between the two installation is not as you want it to be, and it, in general, reduces the level of collaboration. So to overcome that, we would like to be able to manage all our extra artifacts, risk, user requirements, and functional specifications in the same platform where most of the project work is being done. In many cases, this is Jira, and what we basically want to achieve is to manage these things in Jira. Before we dive into how we do that, it's worth mentioning that these elements are not just a collection of elements. We all are very familiar with the requirements for traceability. So we need to make sure that if we manage user requirements and risks in Jira, they can be traced down into functional specification, traced down into tests, and then into test executions. So if we are going to look at Jira to manage those things, it's very important that we understand how we manage traceability. The extra challenge that comes with traceability, especially in today's agile environment, is the fact that we don't want to set up the traceability at the very end of the project or at the very beginning of the project, very waterfall stylish. We want actually to manage the traceability throughout the project. So together with our stories and epic, as the specification of our actual deliverable are emerging and being more and more detailed and specific, we want to reflect that in all these design elements and keep the traceability up to date. So if there are gaps in traceability, we find them as early as possible and resolve them. I'm shortly going to head into a Jira which is configured to support these requirements. I'll explain before that what you will see in terms of the configuration of Jira. First of all, the Jira I'm showing is a Jira server instance, and it has been extended to include 3 additional issue types that are specifically related to design controls. These are risks, user requirements, and functional specifications. These issue types are just using the out-of-the-box capability of Jira to define any issue type that you basically want to have on your system. So that's a built-in capability of Jira to have this extra issue types. The risk issue type is further on implemented by the use of a risk register, which is an app from the Marketplace. The test suite that I selected to demo is XrayApp by XpandIT. It has all the selection of test-related issue types, so it's test plans, test runs, etc. And that's what you'll see in the demo. So let's move on and look at Jira. I'll make it full screen. This is a functional specification issue within our project. So my project is the Mars lander, and we are currently working on its upcoming version 1.0. We have already an ongoing version, which is 0.5, and this is a new version we are working on. You see this issue type is functional specification. And as the project owner, I'm now interested to see how the traceability of this issue is covered, whether it has all the links that it needs to have. So I head down to the issue links area in Jira, and I see that this is a risk mitigation functional specification. It mitigates a risk issue. It has already 3 different tests that will be testing it. And it is also traces up into a high-level user requirement, ECS 90. So this functional spec is sitting well within its traceability matrix. But if I needed to go over all the issues of the project and make sure that they are all covered, this becomes very, very tedious, and it's super complicated, if not impossible, to actually see the big picture. So that's where structure comes into play. I'll head over to the structure tab. This is one structure which I have defined for the sole purpose of managing the traceability of this project. Mars lander version 1.0. And I have split what I put here into 4 different folders. Of course, the configuration of these folders and most of the layout here is totally configurable. So my selection was to have one folder for risk management traceability, one for specification traceability, one folder which collects all the defects that were found, and one which is my secret weapon to manage the traceability, is where I will see automatically various errors and missing links within my traceability. Now, the structure is currently collapsed. I'll just briefly open it totally so that you'll see how it looks like when it's open. So under the risk management folder, we can see the risk traceability. So the highest level of issues are the risks. They trace down into functional specification and then are traced down into tests. I also have 2 columns which give me the status of the test execution. So this is still a project ongoing, and these tests were not executed yet, so the status of the test is still to do. Further down, I'll find some tests that are in more advanced state. The specification folder holds traceability from the high-level requirements down into the test executions and into the defects. So if I look, I'll scroll down and find one that is totally elaborated. This is a user requirement that is covered by 3 different functional specifications. Each one of them is further tested by tests. And this specific one has been already executed and has failed. So as you can appreciate, the failure of the test is expressed not only on the test level, it's also propagating up into the functional specification and into the user requirement. So even if I collapse here, I can see that I have a problem with this user requirement at the moment. There is a test which fails and there is a defect that is open against it. Okay, so let's say collapse this back and start actually doing some real meaty stuff in terms of managing the problems and the issues I have here with traceability. The first thing that I want to monitor are my risks. So let's look a bit closer into how risks look like in this project. So each risk issue type will have the expected fields for a risk issue type, like severity, likelihood, the risk rating, and then the residual severity, likelihood and severity once the risk has been mitigated. In this particular risk, we can see that despite the fact that we have a mitigation, the risk rating is still high. Just to explain why it's high, let's look 1 minute on the risk model. So this is how my risk model is, and in my definition, anything that is 3 and higher is unacceptable and I have to mitigate it. Let's assume that I have many risks in the project and I want to see in one glance those that are not sufficiently mitigated and which I need to handle. So you see I have here the column of residual risk as part of the structure, but I also have a way to quickly filter and show me only those risks that need to be further mitigated. I created a quick transformation. I have a set of filters here that are prepared by myself to manage this particular assignment. And one of them is unacceptable residual risk. Once I press that, only risks that are either too high still or for which the residual risk is still not calculated appear, and I can now just go over each and every one of them and mitigate them. So if I go back to this ECS 92, which is already opened here, I review it and I understand that basically what happened here is that despite the mitigation, no one has recalculated or reconsidered that the residual likelihood is actually very low now. I will refresh the view here. This will immediately make this go down. No, it did not go down. Yes, sorry, I did not press it here, and I will also reduce it here to a 1. I will refresh it. It's now the residual risk went all the way down to 1, and it should no longer appear here. I'll refresh the view. And basically, I need to see that I have 1 less risk to manage because I have already managed it. Yes. I can now go on and resolve the other 2 risks and solve that problem. I will open again, I will release the filter, and I will now head down into my matrix error folder, where I actually prepared for myself a set of folders, each one of them containing specific matrix error that could occur, which I want to tackle in time. So my ambition is that both these folders will always be empty because I don't want to have matrix errors. The first matrix error type that I'm addressing here is the situation where I have functional specifications which do not trace up into any user requirement. So for example, if I'm looking at this one, it's a functional specification, and I can see that it's not linked to any user requirement. I'll go behind the scene and explain how this is set up. So structure comes with a set of capabilities which are called automation. And these are rules by which this specific structure is governed. So no one in this structure that I've set here, I don't go and put things manually. I define rules, and according to these rules, items either show or do not show up in the structure. Let's open the automation window. And you can see all the brown lines here are various rules that I put together in order to create the specific behavior of this structure. If I look into the orphan functional specification, there are actually two automation rules that dictate what I see here. One of them is the one with the plus sign, which dictates which issues make their way down into this folder. And the rule is simple. It's governed by JQL. Issue type equals functional specification. So all functional specifications can potentially go into that place. I then apply the filter, which restricts the functional specification which actually go in. And this filter, I'll just open it up so that you'll see. It's basically a JQL query, which I entered here, and filters, so only issues which correspond to that JQL query will show up. And that JQL query is basically an issue that does not have a link which is traces up to, which is the type of link that corresponds to the link between functional specification and user requirements. And I wanted basically to catch those issues which are functional specification and do not have this link. And this JQL query basically restricts the view here and selects exactly those issues that I'm interested in. By the way, it's worth mentioning, this JQL is not a standard JQL that is built into Jira. It's a JQL which is supplied by ScriptRunner. So ScriptRunner is probably the most common add-on in the Jira ecosystem. And if you have a system without ScriptRunner, you should go ahead and install ScriptRunner. I don't think that any Jira installation is actually complete without ScriptRunner. And therefore, my assumption is that you can also get hold on this JQL and use it here. Okay. So this is the automation that governs what appears here under the folder orphan functional specification. I'll turn it off now. And we revert back to the normal view. I also created another folder that finds for me the user requirements that are untraced. So this particular user requirement is still childless. There is no functional specification that are covered. And of course, nothing prevents me from adding folders and different rules here, just depending on how you want to manage the project and what are the queries that makes more sense to you. So that is basically the end of the demo. If I go back to the presentation, I will recap what are the configurations that I have put together. So we have Jira. We extended Jira by defining dedicated issue types. So the user requirements, the functional specification, and of course you can give them any other name that you wish. We extended the issue links that are part of Jira to include also issue links that refer to the traceability. And in terms of apps or plugins from the marketplace, we have added the structure, of course, risk register, Xray, and ScriptRunner. The nice thing about all this setup, it did not require even one single line of programming or scripting. It's all just a matter of configuration from the user interface. That's basically the presentation, and I'm now handing over back to Dave.
Thank you, Rina. We do have a number of questions queued up from the audience, but before we get to that, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to say just a couple of words about ALM Works. So as Rina just mentioned, ALM Works is the creator of Structure. Structure is one of the most popular Jira applications in the Atlassian Marketplace. It's ranked consistently among the top 5 installed Jira applications over the last 7 years running. And the reason for that, I hope, was a little bit evident in Rina's presentation, perhaps very evident, that with Structure, you're able to truly create a big picture view that maps to the way you're trying to manage a project. And in fact, multiple users within an organization can create multiple structures that all map to the way they want to view their project data. So you're not limited to one type of view. And importantly, Structure allows you to look across Jira projects. One of the limitations of Jira that frustrates many project managers, particularly people who are at the program or portfolio management level, is that they're not able to easily look across projects. With Structure, that's accomplished quite easily. Structure is actually a product family. There are add-ons to Structure, or we call them extensions. A couple of them are free. The first and third, Gantt and Testy, are actually free. Pages is a Confluence and a Confluence and Jira application that allows you to embed Confluence pages and work on Confluence pages right inside your structures, and to link Confluence pages to Jira issues visually and easily. The Gantt solution, as the name suggests, is an extension to Structure that allows you to look at projects on a timeline and visualize dependencies. And Testy is a lightweight testing tool. It's certainly not something I would compare to Xray, which Rina was using in her demonstration, but for folks that are looking for an easy way to record test results and view those test results in their structures, that's what Testy is for. Structure tends to be used by Atlassian's largest customers. You see the obligatory customer logo slide there. We have over 4,000 customers today, and they tend to be Atlassian's biggest customers. But we also have many customers at the low end of the spectrum too, and I think that's going to change very, very soon. We'll see more of those folks when we release our Jira Cloud edition of Structure, which will be coming out shortly. Let's get to the questions from the audience. Some of them are for Rina. I think a couple of them may be for me. And I'll just point out that if anyone has any follow-up questions or things that they'd like to ask about the webinar or comments they'd like to make about the webinar, you can use the email address there. If there are questions for Rina, we'll make sure they get to her, of course. If there are questions for ALM Works, of course, we'll deal with them ourselves. So let me look at the questions here and read some of them. So Rina, one of our participants today has asked about the way you had your folders laid out in the structure. Is that something that's prescribed by Structure, or can you arbitrarily change folders any way you wish?
Yes, so thanks for the question first. It's a very good question, and rightly so. So the folders are totally flexible and up to you. For example, I'll add one just now. I don't have a good idea for a name, but I'll just call it a new folder, and it's now there. So, and now it's for me, of course, to fill it up with content and decide what goes into that folder, but it's there. I can, of course, also change the order of the folders and so on. Yes. Okay.
The next question is for me, actually. At first, a comment from the questioner. He said, excellent presentation, so thank you for that comment. The question is about Structure and it being available for Jira Server only. So the answer to your question is yes and no. Today, Structure is available for Jira Server and Jira Data Center. It is part of the data center approved program from Atlassian. But the Jira Cloud version of Structure, as I mentioned a moment ago, is not yet available. However, there is an early access program that is running now. There will be a beta release available shortly, and then a commercial release of the product early next year. So I'll follow up with this particular individual, and if anyone else is interested in the early access program, please just send an email to that webinar at almworks.com, and I'll send you some more information about the early access program. Okay. And then it looks like we have another question for you, Rina. In your presentation or in your demonstration, you were using subtasks. And the question from the audience member is, can subtasks be shown inside of a structure automatically?
Yes. So I'll just show if I have any subtask here. I'm not sure, but the answer is, so the answer is simply yes. And if I open the automation rules, I think I even have a rule here, yes. So these type of rules that are with this, it looks like a link, if you have imagination, just beside them, are extension rules, which means that if an issue makes their way into the structure, then it will carry with it linked issues, yes? And one of the type of links or extensions that you can configure is to add subtasks. So for example, this particular automation rule will add all subtasks of the type specification. Okay, I think this is answering the question. So subtasks can be pulled as a matter of extension. And of course, they can also be put manually or by their own right, yes? But you can also pull them just by the fact that their parent made their way into the structure.
That is correct, Rina, and I'll elaborate just a tiny bit. It turns out subtask is really just a task, and a subtask is just a special kind of Jira link type. And so what Rina was just showing everyone is the extender rules that we have in Structure, or one of the extender rules that we have in Structure. And as you can see in her rule set there, she has a number of extenders. So you can keep adding extenders to your business rules as you wish. And if one of the things you want to do is automatically pull subtasks that are children of tasks into your structure, you can certainly do that easily. Okay. Another quick question for you, Rina, I think, because I certainly can't answer this one. Where'd it go? There it is. Once the project is completed and a product is released, how are you creating release artifacts? And in other words, where do you get or put the specification documents and other things that you need to store in your design history file?
Yes, so that is indeed a very valid question, because Structure really helps me throughout the evolution of the project. But at the end of the day, once the product has been released, I need to be able to create these artifacts. And there are several ways to go around it. I'll demonstrate one way, which is definitely not the only way, but what you need basically to do is to extract the information from Jira into a format which you can easily show your auditors or include in your submission file or whatever. So what I used in this environment is the exporting mechanisms from Jira, and I hook them into a post a workflow transition. So in this particular case, I have defined an issue type, which is version. It's not part of the traceability, but it controls how the documentation is being extracted. And I have a transition button that is called Regenerate Docs. Once I press it, what basically happens in the background is that there is a process that collects the information from the various artifacts in Jira and packs them into a set of Word documents. So the plugin I'm using to do that is Exporter. So it's an app for Jira. And you can configure it, and assuming, of course, that your data is structured in a very specific way, as we have seen in the demonstration, it will be able to generate the necessary information into, in this case, Word documents, and then these Word documents are just normal documents, and you can put them into your document management system and process them in whatever way you see fit. As said, it's not the only way to do that, but it's a way that works pretty well for some customers. Yes.
Okay, great. Next question, is the requirement status column a calculated formula? And if so, could you please show us the formula?
I think the person was referring to this particular column, the requirement status. Yes, it is a formula. It's a formula that is basically part of the way that you configure X-ray. So it is a capability that is delivered by the test suite. And as part of the configuration of this test suite, you can define how this is being calculated. And there are, I think, two or three ways at least that you can consider it. I'll just show you very briefly the admin panel of X-ray. I'll not go too much into these details, but I'll show you where it is, just in case you were interested to dig further, and it's there. And there is a few pages of good documentation by X-ray on how you can, what this exactly means. So yeah, 1 minute. Yes. If we go to the X-ray panel, there is a set of configuration items. As you see, there's a big set of them, and it's well explained. So I encourage the audience, if you are interested in it, just head that direction and try it, because you have several options and each one of them will behave slightly differently, and see if what of the options would suit you best.
Great. Thank you. Another comment from the audience attached to the question. I really like this, so thank you to the questioner. But also, they're asking, what kind of reports can we generate from structure? What kind of print reports can we generate from structure? So I'll take that one. Structure has the ability to, has a print capability, and it also has a Jira and a Confluence gadget, so that structures can actually be displayed inside Jira dashboards or inside Confluence pages. So a lot of people prefer to do this electronically, but we also do have an export to PDF function, which would allow you to export a structure, or the desired structure as displayed the way you like it, to a printer or to a PDF file that you could share with others. Next question. This person is assuming that users are using stories during sprints, or at least that's a question. In your experience, are your customers using stories in sprints? And if so, how do user stories relate to functional specifications and user requirements in your projects? And how do you ensure they're kept aligned?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for this question. I was asking myself if this webinar will pass without this question being asked, because I think this is the hottest question that is being asked whenever we talk about design controls within an agile context, especially if you are just starting off with your either agile transformation or design control transformation. I'll give you my opinion, and it's based on experience and things that I have seen happening wrong in some situations. So my strong recommendation first is that stories are not the same as specifications, and it's worth separating between the two. If a team tries to say that a story is actually a functional specification, it holds water for the first one or two releases of the product, but as the product evolves, stories become less and less of functional specifications, and we find more and more the need to make a big house cleaning exercise and set up functional specification as a separate entity. So my recommendations start from the very beginning by having stories and functional specification, and the relationship between them should be, in mature organizations, the following: that part of the definition of done of a story is that once a story arrives to the situation that it's almost closed, someone needs to go and do the alignment of how this story impacts the user requirements and the functional specification, and make sure that your user requirements and functional specifications are updated to reflect how the product is after the story has been implemented. I have not included stories in this traceability matrix to keep the story a bit simple, because once you get stories into the structure, it becomes more complex and you get into debates on how exactly to run your sprints, etc. I didn't want to go so much into that direction, but you definitely want to have a view of whether each story that has been concluded has also passed through a phase where it has been evaluated how it impacts the specification. And that is something that you can also achieve via a workflow. So make sure that in your workflow, in the same way that you have a phase that takes care of writing the tests, you should have a phase that takes care of cleaning up the specification and reflecting the impact of the story on these specifications. I hope the answer was clear. If not, you can ask a further question, but it's a long-winded answer.
Okay, and actually that questioner just said thank you, so I assume that satisfied his question. So one last question, because we promised a 45-minute webinar today. And just before I hand that question over to Rina, I'll say to everyone that your questions are welcome. As I mentioned at the beginning, you can send any remaining questions that you may have to webinar@almworks.com, and we'll make sure they get to Rina, or we'll answer them if they're about our products. I'm sure Rina would be happy to talk with any. Well, I shouldn't assume that, but I think Rina would be happy to speak with anyone, and sure. we of course would as well. So final question we'll take for today. Rina, how do you suggest people handle multiple versions of a requirement, version 1, version 2, et cetera, and the tests associated with those versions of the requirements? Do you have versions, or is the requirement duplicated? Yes.
So even here, the question depends to a certain extent on how you work. Because one simple approach to just get you going with traceability in Jira assumes that you always have one version in Works, and that you release a version and then work on the next version and release that one, etc. And if that is your situation, then you could basically at the end of a version produce all the artifacts, keep them separately from the live Jira, because you have exported them in the form of PDF or Word or what have you, or Confluence. This is your DHR, and then you can go on and really update your existing specifications. This works definitely to start with, but as you, let's say, increase your speed and you maybe start working on several versions at the same time and so on, you need to go on and build a more sophisticated structure in Jira. I have seen few flavors of these being implemented over time. I think the one that works best is where you basically keep subtasks of specifications, and each subtask represents the same user requirement or a functional specification in a different version.
Great. So with that, we're going to end today's webinar. I'll elaborate on what I said a moment ago about additional questions. There are several questions in the queue that just came into the queue that we're not going to have a chance to cover today, but I promise you that we will preserve the questions that were asked here in the webinar, and we'll follow up with the folks who asked the question. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question live, I promise we'll follow up with you and answer those questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance today. We know everyone is very busy, and it's hard to take time out of your day for something like this, but we hope it was useful, and we hope that you'll check in with us again in the future to learn more about these kinds of solutions. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening.